The mid-afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, its heat a silent, ominous harbinger for the quiet suburban life John and Emily had built. After John left for his meeting, the old central AC in their home finally gave up, and the repairman who arrived was his old friend, Mark. A man whose friendly smile barely concealed the bottomless hunger in his eyes, a look that had always made Emily uneasy. "Emily, your husband, he truly trusts me, doesn't he?" The whispered words echoed behind her, their slimy resonance making her skin crawl. John had genuinely believed it was okay to leave her alone to wait for him. But the moment the two of them were alone in the house, the atmosphere changed. Mark gently put down his tools and grabbed her thin wrist. The brutal heat and force in his fingers turned her resistance into a futile gesture. "I don't want to share a beautiful woman like you with anyone." With those words, he pushed her down. This was the beginning of a depraved desire from a man who wore a friend's mask. And it was the start of a hellish descent, where she would keep a terrible secret from her husband and sink deeper into a swamp of lies. The relentless summer sun beat down on the quiet suburban house, a heat that felt both ordinary and, in hindsight, like an ominous prelude. It was the first summer John and Emily had spent in their new home and the first year of their marriage. The air inside, usually filled with the warmth of their life together, felt thick and still. Their central air conditioning, a machine they had never given a second thought, had just stopped working. "I have to go, Em," John said, tying his shoes by the front door. "I've got a last-minute client meeting." Emily was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. "I know, honey. It's fine. Mark said he'd be here around noon." John stood up and walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed her forehead. "I hate leaving you in this heat. I really wanted to be here to let him in." Emily leaned into his embrace. "Don't worry about it. It's just Mark. You've known him forever. I trust him." She meant the words, but a strange, unsettling feeling stirred in her stomach. Mark wasn't just a high school friend of John's. He had been the best man at their wedding. He was always friendly and jovial with John, but whenever he looked at Emily, his eyes held a cold, appraising quality that made her skin crawl. It was a fleeting look, gone as soon as it appeared, but it always left her feeling exposed. She had never mentioned it to John. It felt petty, like she was insulting his oldest friend for no good reason. "All right, I'm off," John said, breaking the hug. "Don't open the door for anyone else, okay? And text me if he's late." "I will. Be safe." The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed in the suddenly silent house. Emily listened to the distant rumble of John's car pulling out of the driveway until it faded completely. She was alone. The silence felt heavy, a stark contrast to the happy chaos of their morning. She busied herself with tidying up, trying to shake the feeling of unease that clung to her. She checked the time on her phone. Mark had said he'd be there by noon. She had a few hours to herself. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. The heat was becoming unbearable. She went to the living room, fanning herself with a magazine, her eyes fixed on the blank television screen. A sudden sharp ring of the doorbell made her jump. It was just a little past 11. He was early. Emily walked to the door, her heart thumping against her ribs. She took a deep breath before opening it. "Emily, sorry I'm early," Mark said, his smile stretching wide. He was a big guy, with broad shoulders and a muscular frame. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. "Is John around?" "No, he just left for work. Said he had a meeting." Mark's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes shifted. A predatory flicker, cold and calculating. It was the same look she'd seen before, but this time, it was impossible to ignore. A shiver ran down her spine despite the heat. "Oh, too bad," he said, stepping past her into the house. "Well, I guess I'll get started. Lead the way." The moment he was inside, the atmosphere in the house changed. The air, which had been simply hot, now felt thick and heavy, with a presence she couldn't place. It wasn't the easygoing energy of her husband's friend. It was something else, something she couldn't define but instinctively feared. "The unit is in the basement," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. She led him through the living room, feeling his eyes on her back. Mark followed, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't looking at the broken air conditioner. His gaze was fixed on her, like a hawk studying its prey. Emily's stomach tightened into a knot. She could feel his quiet presence behind her, and for the first time in her own home, she felt like an intruder. Her legs felt weak. She stopped by the basement door, unable to move forward. "Down here?" he asked, his voice low. Emily could only nod. She was frozen, her mind screaming at her to run, but her body wouldn't obey. This was no longer just about a broken air conditioner. This was about something else entirely. Something she had sensed all along but had desperately tried to convince herself wasn't real. The friendly mask had fallen, and behind it, a monster was waiting. Mark descended the basement stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. Emily stood frozen at the top, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to turn and run, but a powerful, paralyzing fear held her in place. He was down there for what seemed like an eternity, the silence occasionally broken by the clatter of his tools. Finally, he emerged, a nonchalant expression on his face. "Looks like a simple fix," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Just a clogged drain line. It'll be a few minutes." He set his toolbox down on the living room floor, not bothering to open it. He sat down on the sofa, his massive frame taking up most of the space. "It's so hot in here. You must be dying, Emily." Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She remained standing, a safe distance away. Mark patted the empty space on the couch beside him. "Come on, sit down. Don't be so nervous." She shook her head, clutching her arms. "I'm fine. I'll just wait here." A flicker of something dark crossed Mark's face. "Emily, don't be ridiculous. It's just me." He stood up and took a step toward her. "You're a married woman now, aren't you? A little more confident?" The air in the room grew thick. Emily's mind raced, searching for an escape. I have to check on something in the kitchen." She turned to leave, but his hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His grip was a vice, painful and unyielding. "Don't go anywhere. We should talk." "What is there to talk about?" Emily's voice was a weak whisper. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "About how foolish John is," Mark said, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Leaving his beautiful wife alone with me. He thinks he knows everything about me, but he doesn't know a thing about what I want." His eyes dropped to her body, a brazen, possessive look that made her stomach churn. Emily's fight-or-flight instinct screamed at her. She kneed him in the stomach hard, and he grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all the time she needed. She twisted away and scrambled toward the front door, but Mark was faster. He lunged, tackling her to the floor. The air was knocked from her lungs, and her head hit the hardwood with a sickening thud. He pinned her down, his weight crushing her. "Bad girl," he growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You shouldn't have done that." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she thrashed beneath him, her body screaming with a primal fear. She clawed at his face, her nails finding purchase, but he only chuckled, his grip tightening. She felt utterly helpless. Her home, her sanctuary, had become a cage. She screamed for John, a broken, desperate cry that was swallowed by the silence. Mark's hand clamped over her mouth, his breath hot on her ear. "John's not coming to save you," he whispered. "He's not here, and even if he were, he wouldn't believe you." Emily's resistance began to fade, replaced by a devastating sense of defeat. He was right. How could she possibly explain this to John? How could she tell her husband that his best friend, the man he trusted like a brother, had done this to her? Mark's threats echoed in her mind. He'd ruined John's life, his business, everything they had. A single, final sob escaped her as Mark removed his hand from her mouth. She lay there, defeated, her body limp, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The world around her blurred, and all she could feel was the weight of his body and the suffocating sense of despair. When it was over, Mark stood up, adjusted his clothes, and walked back to his toolbox as if nothing had happened. He picked up his tools, a calm, satisfied look on his face. "Don't you ever tell John about this," he said, his voice now a low, chilling command. "Not a word. If you do, I'll make sure to ruin his life and everything you two have. Understand?" Emily couldn't speak. She could only stare at him, a silent plea for mercy in her eyes. Mark didn't need a verbal response. He knew he had won. He walked out of the house, leaving her alone on the floor, broken and shattered, her life forever changed by a moment of misplaced trust. The hours following Mark's departure were a blur of a cold, silent agony for Emily. She lay on the floor for what felt like an eternity, the chilling sensation of his touch still lingering on her skin. When the front door finally clicked shut, the silence was deafening, a crushing weight that sealed her in a bubble of despair. She finally managed to get up, her body aching and her mind numb. She went straight to the shower, scrubbing at her skin with a desperate ferocity, as if she could wash away the filth of what had happened. But no matter how hard she scrubbed, the feeling of violation remained. When John came home, his bright smile and cheerful greeting were a torment. "Honey, I'm home. The meeting was a bust, but I brought your favorite cupcakes," he called out. Emily froze in the hallway. The sweet scent of the cupcakes, a symbol of their happy life, felt like a cruel joke. She couldn't bring herself to face him. His innocence was a mirror reflecting her own shame. "Em, are you okay?" John's voice was filled with concern as he found her standing still in the hallway, her hair still damp. "You look pale. Did the heat get to you?" She managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, just tired." John put the cupcake box down and hugged her tightly. The warmth of his embrace, a comfort she had always cherished, now felt suffocating. She stiffened in his arms, her body refusing to relax. He pulled away slightly, his brow furrowed with worry. "Are you sure? You've been acting weird since I got back from work. What's wrong?" 100 explanations died on her tongue. The words were a cage, and Mark held the key. He had threatened to destroy John's life, his career, his reputation. The fear of that happening was a powerful muzzle. "Nothing, really," she lied, pushing him away gently. I'm just tired." John looked hurt, but he didn't press the issue. He let her go, and she fled to their bedroom, locking the door behind her. She listened as he made a simple dinner for them, the clatter of pots and pans, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. That night, John's arm around her was no longer a source of comfort. Every time he stirred in his sleep, she flinched, her body tensing up. She stared at the ceiling for hours, the image of Mark's face superimposed on the darkness. The next morning, her phone, once a source of connection to the world, became a symbol of her torment. A message from an unknown number made her heart leap into her throat. "John has no idea what happened, does he? Your terrified face was so beautiful, Emily. I can't stop thinking about it." The words felt like a physical blow. Emily's hand trembled, and she almost dropped her phone. The message was not just a reminder, it was a threat, a twisted game he was playing. It was a clear message. He was watching her. He knew everything, and she was his. From that day on, Mark's messages became a constant, suffocating presence. "Does John work late tonight? I could come over and finish the job. Remember the look on your face? I want to see that again." The frequency of his texts increased with John's long hours at work. Emily's days were spent in a state of perpetual fear. She had to lie to John about where she was going and what she was doing. She couldn't tell him the truth. The threat of Mark exposing their secret loomed over her, a dark cloud that blotted out her every thought. She tried to block his number once, but a call from a different number came through almost immediately. "Did you really think that would stop me, Emily? One wrong move, and I'll send John a little video I took. The look on his face will be priceless." Emily's blood ran cold. He had a video. The thought made her physically ill. From that moment on, she was his puppet. He would call her, pretending to be John's friend, asking if he could come over to check on the AC. And she would agree, her voice a hollow shell of its former self, terrified of what he might do if she refused. "The unit's acting up again, John," she would lie over the phone. "Mark said he needs to come by and check on it." John, unsuspecting, would agree. his trust in his friend unwavering. Every time Mark came over, the cycle of terror repeated itself. Emily stopped fighting back. She learned that resistance only made him more violent, more sadistic. She would simply close her eyes and wait for it to be over, her mind trying to escape the confines of her body. She had become an empty vessel, a ghost in her own home. She had been robbed of her voice, her will, and her peace. And the worst part was, she couldn't share the burden with the one person she trusted most. John, her loving husband, had no idea that the man he trusted had not only stolen her innocence, but also his own wife. The silence that had settled between Emily and John wasn't the comfortable quiet of a long-married couple. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of unspoken pain and guilt. John, a man who saw the world in straightforward terms, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong. The changes in Emily were subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. She no longer hummed while cooking. She'd flinch if he touched her unexpectedly, and her eyes, once bright with life, now seemed clouded and distant. Their conversations, which used to flow so easily, became stilted and forced. John would ask about her day, and she'd give him one-word answers, a wall of silence between them. One evening, he found her sitting on the living room floor, her knees pulled to her chest, a silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Emily? What is it? What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. He knelt down beside her, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She jumped as if his touch had burned her and quickly wiped her face. "Nothing, John. I told you I'm just tired." "Tired of what? You're never like this," he pressed, his voice firm but gentle. "You're not yourself. You're jumpy, you're sad. I know something's wrong. You can tell me anything. I'm your husband." John's unwavering trust, his genuine love, was a source of both comfort and a new kind of terror for Emily. She desperately wanted to tell him everything, to confess her humiliation, her fear, her living nightmare. But Mark's threats echoed in her mind. The thought of Mark destroying John's career, his reputation, made her stomach churn. The image of John's face, heartbroken and disgusted, if he ever found out, was a pain she couldn't bear to inflict. "Please, John," she said, her voice a plea. "Just leave me alone for a little while." He recoiled as if she had struck him. He stood up, his face a mask of hurt and confusion. The distance between them had never felt so vast. The real turning point came a few days later. John had decided to take Emily out for lunch, hoping to break the emotional ice that had formed between them. They were seated at a small diner downtown when Mark walked in with a colleague. John's face lit up. "Mark, hey, buddy," he called out, waving him over. Mark's smile was instant and effortless as he approached their table. It was the same charming, friendly smile John had known for years. "John, man, good to see you. What are you two doing here?" But as Mark's eyes slid to Emily, his smile changed. It was a subtle shift, a flash of something dark and possessive in his gaze, a look that lasted only a second, but felt like an eternity to Emily. She stiffened, her hands trembling as she clutched her menu. "Just trying to get Emily out of the house. She hasn't been feeling well," John said, oblivious to the silent communication passing between them. Mark's eyes met hers again, and he gave her a knowing, almost predatory wink. Emily's face went white. She felt a wave of nausea, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Oh, really? That's too bad," Mark said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Well, I hope you feel better, Emily." John, finally sensing the unusual tension, looked from Emily's panicked face to Mark's unreadable expression. "Everything okay, Em?" I need to go to the restroom," she stammered, dropping her menu and almost stumbling as she stood up. She rushed away from the table, desperate to escape. John's brow furrowed. He turned to Mark. "What was that about? She's been doing that a lot lately." Mark just shrugged, his demeanor cool and unconcerned. "Must be all that summer heat. The AC is still a bit tricky, you know." He gave a short, dismissive laugh, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. John looked at his friend, and for the first time, he saw something else. A flicker of cruelty, a dark amusement in Mark's gaze as he watched Emily disappear. The easygoing facade was cracking, and John felt a powerful unease. The way Mark had looked at her, the way Emily had reacted, it wasn't normal. It was the look of a predator and its prey. Mark finished his brief conversation, offered a friendly goodbye, and left. John sat there alone, staring at the empty chair where Emily had been. The food on his plate had gone cold. A terrible suspicion was beginning to form in his mind, a monstrous idea that he didn't want to believe. He had trusted Mark with everything. But what if that trust had been a fatal mistake? What if his best friend had been taking advantage of his wife, and he had been too blind to see it? A deep, cold dread settled in John's stomach. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his life and his marriage were in grave danger, and the source of that danger was the man he called his friend. He had to know the truth, no matter what it cost him. The phone buzzed in John's hand. He sighed, expecting another update on the stalled corporate project. But the text from his boss was an unexpected reprieve. System-wide server crash. We're sending everyone home for the day. Head back and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. John stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was only a little past noon. The opportunity felt like a gift. He could surprise Emily. The past few weeks had been heavy with her unspoken sadness, and he ached to see her smile again. He decided to stop at her favorite bakery and pick up a box of chocolate eclairs. He imagined her face lighting up as he presented them, the small gesture bridging the distance that had grown between them. The drive home was filled with a rare, buoyant lightness. He pictured her in her favorite t-shirt and shorts, probably reading in the living room, completely unaware he was on his way. He pulled into the driveway, the car's engine a gentle purr in the afternoon quiet. He grabbed the bakery box and let himself in, the house key turning silently in the lock. "Emily? Honey, I'm home," he called out, his voice filled with cheer. No answer. A strange, muffled sound came from the living room. It wasn't the sound of music or the TV. It was a faint, struggling noise, almost a whimpering sound. A cold dread, a premonition, washed over him. He moved silently, his heart pounding in his ears, the bakery box forgotten in his hand. He pushed the living room door open just enough to peek inside. The sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. His vision tunneled, the world narrowing to a single horrific tableau. Mark, his best friend, the man he had trusted without a second thought, was on top of Emily. Her dress was torn, her face a mask of silent terror and tears. She wasn't making a sound, just a raw, silent agony. Her body was a study in limp, defeated despair. A guttural roar ripped from John's throat. The bakery box dropped from his hand, the delicate pastry scattering across the floor. He lunged, a blind, murderous rage propelling him forward. Mark's reaction was instantaneous. He saw John in the doorway and, with a terrifying speed, scrambled off of Emily. His eyes, devoid of any humanity, scanned the room. His hand darted to the kitchen table, a few feet away, and closed around a steak knife. "Don't you take another step, John." Mark's voice was a low, chilling command. John stopped dead in his tracks, his body a trembling coil of fury. Mark was now standing over Emily's prone form, the knife held threateningly in his hand. The sharp blade gleamed in the afternoon sun, its point resting just below Emily's chin. "Mark, you bastard! What are you doing?" John's voice cracked with a desperate fury. "Get away from her!" Mark chuckled, a sound filled with the dark, twisted satisfaction of a man who held all the power. "I told you, didn't I? I told you I wanted her. You just wouldn't listen." He pressed the tip of the knife slightly into Emily's skin. A thin, red line appeared on her neck. "Please, John." Emily's voice was a barely audible whisper, raw with terror. "Don't." John's fists clenched. His mind screamed at him to rush forward, to tear Mark apart with his bare hands. But he couldn't. Emily was in the line of fire. He was trapped. The very force that had driven him forward now held him frozen in place. "Good. Now you listen," Mark said, his voice dropping to a sadistic purr. He pointed with the knife to a coil of rope lying in the corner of the room, a leftover from a recent project. "Get that rope and tie yourself up." or I swear to God I'll carve you out of her face." The threat was not an idle one. John saw the absolute madness in Mark's eyes. This wasn't a man he knew. This was a monster. The humiliation of the request was a bitter pill to swallow, but he had no choice. He moved to the corner, his every movement a slow, agonizing surrender. He picked up the rope, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and revulsion. He began to bind himself, his mind a storm of curses and self-recrimination. Mark watched, a triumphant smirk on his face. Once John was securely tied, Mark walked over and gave the knots a firm tug, ensuring there was no escape. "Good boy," he said, patting John on the cheek with a disgusting familiarity. "Now you can see everything. A private show just for you." John's mind reeled. The helplessness was worse than any pain he could have imagined. He was a prisoner in his own home, bound and gagged by his own hands, forced to watch as the man he trusted returned to his sickening task. Emily's body was a mirror of her soul, broken and defeated. She no longer had the strength to resist. Her eyes, filled with a silent agony, were fixed on John. Her gaze was a plea for a salvation he couldn't provide, an apology for a betrayal that was never her fault. John screamed, a long, tearing sound of pure agony. He thrashed against the ropes, a wild animal caught in a snare, but it was no use. The ropes held fast. He could do nothing but bear witness. His world, his family, his life, all of it was being desecrated, and he could not lift a finger to stop it. The man who had been his brother was now a wolf in their sheepfold, and the man of the house, the protector, was a helpless spectator. He felt the bonds of love, trust, and friendship being shredded, leaving him with nothing but a soul-crushing, unutterable pain. Bound and helpless, John's screams of fury turned to ragged, agonizing sobs. Every primal instinct in his body demanded he break free, to crush the man who was defiling his wife. But the ropes held fast, a cruel reminder of his utter failure. The world was reduced to the space between him and Emily, a sacred ground that was being violated right before his eyes. He thrashed and writhed, the ropes digging into his skin, but his efforts were futile. The sound he made was an animal sound, a guttural cry of a man pushed beyond all human endurance. He watched as Mark finished his vile act, the look on his face one of sickening triumph. Mark's eyes met John's, and he gave a slow, deliberate smirk. It was a look that said, "I have what you have, and you can't do a damn thing about it." The utter lack of remorse, the casual cruelty, was a new layer of horror. When it was over, Mark stood up, his movements unhurried and calm, as if he had just finished a routine task. He adjusted his clothes, his eyes still fixed on John, a victor surveying the defeated. He bent down and pulled a cell phone from his pocket, snapping a quick, cold picture. Then, with a casual wave, he walked toward the door. "See you around, John. And Emily," he said, his voice light and airy, devoid of any of the menace it had held moments before. "Tell John, I said to take care of you. We wouldn't want anything happening to his pretty wife." The front door clicked shut, the sound a final, brutal period on a nightmare sentence. The silence that followed was a living thing, heavy and oppressive. John could finally hear his own ragged breathing, the blood pounding in his temples. He worked at the ropes, his hands raw and bleeding, until finally the knots gave way. He stumbled to his feet, his body trembling, and rushed to Emily. She was still on the floor, curled into herself. Her clothes were torn, her hair was a mess, and her face was stained with tears. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, a vacant, haunted look that made John's heart seize. "Emily, Emily, honey," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. He gently reached for her, and she flinched away, her body recoiling from his touch. "Don't," she said, her voice a hollow, lifeless whisper. "Don't touch me." The words were like a dagger to his heart. He understood. The man she loved, the man who was supposed to protect her, had been forced to watch her humiliation. He had failed her in the most fundamental way. "I'm so sorry, Em," he choked out, the words a desperate plea. "I'm so sorry." I should have been here. I should have. It's not your fault, she said, her voice cracking. He told me he would. He would hurt you. He would ruin your life. He would send the pictures. Her confession was a fresh wave of agony for John. She had been living with this terror alone. She had sacrificed her own well-being to protect him, and he had been too blind, too trusting, to see it. The anger he felt for Mark was a cold fire in his gut, but the guilt he felt for himself was a poison that would never leave him. He carefully, slowly, reached for her again. This time, he didn't try to touch her. He just sat beside her, his body, a silent offering of support. He wrapped his arms around himself, mirroring her curled-up posture, and sat there in the wreckage of their lives. He could see the shattered remnants of their once happy home, the overturned table, the scattered cutlery, the box of chocolate eclairs, a sickeningly sweet reminder of the world they had lost. They sat there for what seemed like hours, two broken people in a broken home. There were no more tears, no more words, just the quiet understanding of a shared trauma that would forever define them. Their marriage, their love, their sense of security, all of it had been irrevocably shattered. The man who had once been John's best friend had not just violated Emily, he had poisoned everything they had. The unspeakable pain was a wound that would never fully heal, a ghost that would haunt them for the rest of their lives.